Hello, friends. Welcome to Chat tonight with a special edition with our friends Ajahn Pasanno and Sabo, and of course, also to my left, and I guess myself. So welcome to our friends joining in. Hello to Gita, Christopher, Kumu, Miguel, Paul from Australia. Wonderful. In Sydney. And hello to Denise. Welcome to everyone, friends. So whenever you're ready, feel free to type in your questions in the live chat, and we'll try our best to answer them. You're also welcome to ask questions to a specific monastic if you remember the name. Or actually, we have little name tags, so that would be easier. But you'll have to remember either, Bante or Aya, and know how to spell it too. And yeah, and once Angela says, wow, triple Mondstadt, yes, we're getting more technological here at Empty Cloud and at Clear Mountain Monastery, by the way, which is Tani Saba's project together with Ajahn Pasanno, a new monastery that is in the works on the West Coast. Maybe Tani Saba, if you want to share a bit of information on the project that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Ayasoma, Bhante Sudaso. First of all, Ajahn Pasanno and I are really happy that we get to live stream monk chat with all of you. It's been a while, and I got to visit Empty Cloud Monastery last month, and it was a really great time, and I've missed it since I left. Things are also much hotter over here. I'm in Central Washington, but the hope is that Ajahn Pasanno and I are hoping to begin a project called Clear Mountain Monastery in Seattle, or near Seattle, which will be a Thai forest monastery. And yeah, both of us, I visited, and Ajahn Pasanno is going to visit Empty Cloud, and Ayasoma and Bhante Sudaso and the community there. I visited last month, and Ajahn Pasanno will be going there soon. So we're just very happy to be kind of welcomed into that community, and it's nice to be back with old friends. And we'll be doing this every month, I think. Yeah. Ajahn Pasanno?
Yeah, that was a good summary. So right now, the monastery mostly exists as a website and burgeoning community of people. Tanisbo does have a place where he's going to stay outside of Seattle proper, but that's just for the range retreat, so for the next maybe 5 months. But yeah, we're hoping to find some land, and Tanisbo is going to be the main one on the ground for the next few years. I'm currently in a Buddhist university program at Dharma Realm Buddhist University in Ukiah, California. So I'm going to be finishing that degree program over the next 3 years, and we'll be visiting, hopefully there'll be a piece of land and maybe a tent or a large tent at least that I can stay in during summers and winters, and then I'll be going there more full-time in the next 4 years. But also, just to echo Tanisbo, it's great to see Bhante Sudaso and Ayasoma. Bhante Sudaso and I ordained at the monastery. We've known each other for over a decade, and I probably met Ayasoma 6 years ago, whenever you first visited Abhayagiri, or when I first visited there for Chapin First. But it's great to see you, and I'm glad it seems like we're in a collaboration mode, so that's very happy about that.
Yeah, same, likewise. Thank you, Ajahn. Thank you, Tan. It's so very exciting to have you start a project in the East Coast. Our audience is quite silent today, so no questions yet. But welcome to Roy, Ishanti, and Luciana. Hello, Luciana. So everybody's saying hello, but nobody's typing any questions. So maybe this will be a very short chat, or we can actually ask questions to ourselves and then answer them too.
I have a question. Ayasoma Bhante Siddhasa, can you speak about Ajahn Pasanno's recent visit to the monastery and how it was?
It's a great question. Ayasoma, would you like to talk about Ajahn Pasanno?
You can go first, Bhante. Thank you.
Yeah, so recently we had Ajahn Pasanno here. He's my preceptor as well as Ajahn Kovilo's preceptor. He's great. That's it. What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you for asking, Tan. Actually, it's been just such a blessing, I have to say. I had always heard about Ajahn Pasanno, but I had never had the opportunity to meet him. Because also whenever I went to, I happened to go to Abhayagiri, he wasn't there for one reason or the other. And whenever he was supposed to come here, something would happen, like a worldwide pandemic, for example, and and he was not able to come. But finally, thanks to the vaccines, this was the first sort of gift that we had here at Empty Cloud, was his visit, and he stayed with us for a week. And it was also so special to have him at this time, because since we're still somewhat, shut down due to the still ongoing pandemic, we had the precious opportunity to spend so much time with him, which is, as our friend Benz, who is from Thailand, was pointing out, had she met Ajahn Pasanno in Thailand, he would have been like a dot in the far distance, and only, perhaps could have said hello for 2 seconds from, far away. But actually, we had such a good opportunity to spend multiple hours in his company and see really the beauty of this path, of how after practicing, committing to the dharma for so many decades, the mind really becomes so polished and luminous, and it just transfers to everyone around you. So it was a teaching, like really an embodied teaching of the Dhamma, I would say. Even when he was not speaking Dhamma, he was moving in Dhamma, breathing Dhamma. So I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to be with the senior monk. We also went to visit Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, so we had also, really good karma, good karmic conditions to be surrounded by senior monks. But now we have some questions here from our friends. Denise has a question specifically for Tan Nisabo. I read a meditation guide which divides jhana into whole body, pleasure, and luminous jhana. Is this a useful approach to the topic?
Full body? What was the question one more time? Divides jhanas in the whole body, pleasure, and luminous genes. I think that might be autocorrect, but I like it. All right. Can you put up the original question? Thank you. Is this a useful approach to the topic? Wow, that's a really good question. I think I've never heard that explicit division, and to be honest, I don't feel well enough versed in 4 jhanas in terms of the suttas or otherwise to really, I want to be really cautious with my words around this. What I do feel like I can speak to perhaps is the analogies which the Buddha used for the 4 jhanas, and that is resonant with the terms that I see in this question. So, to review, the Buddha used these 4 beautiful analogies to speak about the 4 jhanas. The analogy for the first jhana is that of a bathman or bathman's apprentice kneading water into a ball of bath powder, similar to how we knead water into a ball of dough in the current era. And that was how people created soap in the Buddha's time, until it's pervaded with that water, just so a practitioner pervades his or her body with the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion until no part is unpervaded. The analogy for the second jhana is that of a still lake with cool water coming up from below and down from above. And similarly with the rapture and pleasure born of concentration welling up until the whole body is pervaded. The third analogy is that of a pond of lotuses, which are grown in the water, pervaded by the water. And the fourth is that of a man sitting with a white sheet covering his body, just so that purity of mindfulness pervades one in the fourth jhana. So, I'm looking at this question again. I think what's significant there is the first two of those analogies, that of the bathman's apprentice kneading water into the ball of bath powder and the lake, they do speak to this process of piti, or which is frequently translated as rapture, but is perhaps better translated as refreshment because it's etymologically related to the word for drink. This sense of refreshment pervading the body, and it's active, and it's occurs in the fifth step of the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. And most teachers I've heard speak about this, in my own experience, it really does pervade the body, and it moves, the body's soaking it up. Whereas pleasure, sukha, is what comes next in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. And it's a feeling, so it's static, it's vedana. And traditionally that's looked at as a far more still state. So in the third jhana, you'll notice that instead of there being this image of water moving into the ball of bath powder or welling up into the lake, which both have this sense of movement, it's just lotuses in a still pool of water. So it's completely still. And similarly, in the third jhana's description, it speaks about rapture having faded and just having pleasure. And then finally, the luminous genes, or jhana, could perhaps speak of the fourth analogy of the man covered with a white sheet. And I know that I've asked Ajahn Pasanno about that image, and he said that the white sheet indicates a slight separation of the mind from the body, and how it sort of rests above the body and is luminous. So I think that those four ways of characterizing the jhanas, although I've never heard it explicitly laid out like that, resonate quite well with the images and with the stock descriptions.
Well, thank you very much, Venerable, for that thorough answer. And the next question we'll read out for Ajahn Kovilo. So Roy asks a question on loka, as in, I think he means Vinaya loka. So Vinaya loke abhijja domana sang from the Satipatthana Sutta. It's interpreted either as universe or as the five khandhas, possibly the same thing. Any thoughts appreciated? So Ajahn Kovilo, if you'd like to speak to this question, please.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. So for people who aren't yet familiar with the Pali, Vinaya loke is translated as putting. Vinaya is to put aside. So it can either be a gerund, so having put aside, or you can phrase the gerund in present tense, so putting aside. Greed or distress, that's the missing word. So abhijja domanassa loke, with regards to the world. So this is a question about putting aside mental hindrances when you're practicing meditation. And world here, I think the world is best described in a sutta called, I believe, the Loka Sutta, all about the world and how the Buddha describes the world is in his conception of it. And rather than referring to necessarily what we speak when in English, when we talk about the world, we oftentimes mean planets, specifically planet Earth, or whole like world systems, the universe, the galaxy, etc. But the Buddha just talks about it as what is the world? What is the loka? It is the eye and sight, the ear and sounds, It's the nose and smells, it's the tongue and taste, it's the body and contact, and it's the mind and mental objects. That's the world. And that's a really full definition because that's all we can know. I mean, from the Buddhist empirical teachings, I mean, that's really what matters, not really about speculating about what exists outside, and especially in regard to this Vinaya Loka. So basically putting aside what we can put aside. This is within the realm of our own karma, or our own actions, our own walking of the path. And really the path in its most intimate aspect is a very personal one. So it's putting aside greed and distress with reference to this world as we experience it, which is basically what we can see through our eyes and experience through our other senses. So I would say it's not so much, it's somewhere in between the universe and the five khandhas, and more in this realm of the 6 sense bases, if one wants to label it with Buddhist jargon. So hopefully that's clear. I'd like to hear other people's answers if we don't have other questions, but we could also move on.
Thank you, Venerable.
All right, maybe Dazo, do you want to add something else, or?
No, I think that's pretty thorough.
Great.
Yeah.
And hello to some other friends who have joined us in the meanwhile. Hello to Dayani, Anumodana Sadhu for all the dana that you've been sending to Empty Cloud Monastery. And hello to Andy and Tara, who is our new Anatta Pindika here, here at Empty Cloud Monastery. Hello to Gurgel, Manal. Whenever you're ready, feel free to type in your questions. And hello, Ajahn Brahmavada from Thailand. Good to see you. And hello to Andre. Okay, so we have a question from Kumu. Perhaps we can pass it on to Bhante Sudaso, if that's okay. And Kumu says, in meditation, if the mind wanders away, we bring it back to breath or a specific feeling of body or object. Some say just watch the thoughts without attaching. Is this a good method as well?
Well, so what we're really looking for is the results. So the main risk of the approach of just watching the thoughts without attaching is that we might think that's what we're doing, but often what we're actually doing is that we're participating in those thoughts. Whether consciously or subconsciously, we are encouraging those thoughts to persist in the mind. So we might think, oh, I'm just watching them without attachment. But in actuality, we are engaging with those thoughts, whether overtly or subtly, which is why they keep appearing in the mind. It's why they keep dominating the mind. So that's not really recommended. The other thing is that your samadhi weakens every time you turn your attention away from your samadhi object. So whatever object of attention you're using for your samadhi practice, your mind should never leave that. Your attention should never move away from your samadhi object. So thoughts come and go in the mind, but that should be in the background of attention. You should never turn your attention towards the thoughts. So my perspective is to keep your attention on the object. Don't move it towards the thoughts that appear. Just don't pay any attention to those thoughts. I'd like to think of it as though it's that you're overhearing a conversation about something which is completely irrelevant to you. Like you hear some people talking about a topic of conversation which you have no interest in and which doesn't apply to your life at all and has nothing to do with you. And the people talking are people you don't know and don't have any reason to know. Basically, it just has nothing to do with you. Like when you're walking through the park and you hear 2 random people talking about their work projects, like the most boring thing imaginable. So you're hearing the words, it just has no meaning for you and no relevance to you, so you don't care at all. So that's the kind of attitude to have towards the thoughts that appear in your mind. It's just some background noise which is utterly meaningless and irrelevant. If you practice in this way, then your samadhi will usually grow much more quickly. If you think you're watching the thoughts without attaching, then your samadhi will usually either stalemate or possibly decline. So I don't recommend that approach. But again, we're looking for results. So the question is, what happens when you do that? Some people, when they watch the thoughts, then they actually are recognizing that the thoughts are meaningless and insignificant and pointless. And then that leads to them detaching from those thoughts. But in my experience, that's very rarely successful. It's usually better just to stay on your samadhi object and not pay any attention to the thoughts that come and go in the background. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Great, thank you so much, Bante. And Andre says, hello, Venerables. I hope you all quickly attain full enlightenment. Sadhu, 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 may it be so. What temple is Ajahn Nisabo staying at? That's a great question for me. I like easy questions. So Tanisabo is actually creating a temple, which is much better than staying at the temple, at least according to me. So he is creating the conditions together with Ajahn Kavilo for Clear Mountain Monastery, which, Dayani is very well prepared. And so she typed it in right there. So I'll highlight it, Clear Mountain Monastery. And so you put .com after that, or .org, Tanisabo.org. .org, perfect. And then
I think a spa took .com, but without the monastery. But we're battling a spa for Google search results, so that would be fun to think about. Also,
type in the link like that. All right, and maybe Tanisabo, since you're at it, maybe you can give some more information as well on where you're staying now.
Yeah, thank you, Ayasoma. Yeah, right now I'm actually in a room, an old office space. My parents are longtime practitioners, and they wanted to create a retreat for monastics in central Washington, near a small town called Winthrop. So they bought a piece of land and are planning to build 2 small monastic huts or kutis here, and invite monks and nuns from different traditions from around the world to come and stay and give free teachings, including hopefully Bande Sudaso and Ayasoma. So this is so I'm just here helping them start things up at the moment for the next month, which is involving a lot of dust. And we're staying in tents, so it's some good forest monk barming. But in late June and early July, I'll be moving to Australia, or I don't know why I just said Australia, Seattle, sorry. And that's where Clear Mountain Monastery should perhaps take root. But to be honest, my intention, and Ajahn Kovilo's as well, I think, is, we're just hoping to go and practice simply and well, and we'll see what happens. The rest might happen or it might not, but the practice is supposed to be central, so we're hoping to hold our intention with humility.
Thank you, Tan. And maybe you can ask to Ajahn Kavilo the following question from Gita. Dear Venerable, what should be understood on the 12 links of dependent origination that would be considered essential to penetrate the teaching?
Well, maybe two points which are most practically useful, and that is the point of ignorance and the point between feeling and craving. So between those 2 links, so basically before ignorance arises or craving arises, this is where you can actually do something and actually, either put an end to the cycle, so to speak, So with regards to feeling leading to craving, that is the main, so for people who've practiced in the, say, the Goenka tradition, or that's the main link that they focus on. Basically, in that form of meditation, you're focusing on physical sensations from the tip of the head down to the soles of the feet, and just remaining equanimous. You're not responding with craving is the hope. So, and you can do that. It doesn't just have to be a Goenka practitioner. Basically, that's what all of us here are trying to do, is basically stop the impulsive and reactive response, which just jumps from a pleasant sensation to grabbing onto it and following after it, or having a negative sensation and then just pushing away from it. So that's one link to really pay attention to. For people, they find that the dependent origination is too complex. For others, they just want more. And if you love 12 links, then open up the Abhidhamma and you'll get, 12 times, who knows how many. It's just all of your dreams will be fulfilled if you love complexity. But for people who want very, very simple, practical approaches, first, check out feeling and try not to react to it, craving. And then with ignorance, this is where knowledge of the Four Noble Truths can come in, which are suffering. There is suffering. There is a cause of suffering, which is craving. There is a cessation to the suffering, and there's a path leading to the end of that suffering. So and when you appreciate that, when you have the mindfulness to know that, you are practicing non-ignorance. And the more that we keep our head above water, basically, and basically just approach life, live life from an awake point of view, then that's kind of stopping the whole cycle where it begins. So it's a couple of thoughts.
Great, thank you so much, Ajahn Kavil. And maybe perhaps we can see if Tanisabo also has a few ideas on the subject matter.
I actually was having a bit of trouble hearing what Ajahn Kovila was saying, to be honest. I don't know if the sound's a bit weird, or but I feel like I'd be jumping into exactly what he said. Perhaps if you two could hear him better, maybe one of you would be better able to answer. I feel like I might repeat what he said. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Tan. Bhante Sudato, maybe?
I think Ajahn Kovilo gave a quite good answer there. So those are traditionally the two spots that are emphasized. So the spot of ignorance and then the spot of feeling. But actually, I would say that one of the really useful things with dependent origination is something Ajahn Pasanno, so my preceptor, said many, many years ago. So there's a lot of scholarly debate around whether the dependent origination applies over many lifetimes or within one lifetime or within one moment. And different monks will take stances on different standpoints here. So I was asking Ajahn Pasanno once about this, and he answered that dependent origination has scale invariance. In other words, it applies on all scales. So it doesn't only apply on the single moment scale or the single lifetime scale or the 3 lifetime scale or the many lifetime scale. It applies on all scales equally. So this was something that really opened up my understanding of dependent origination, was this idea that it can be clearly observed both in every moment of our life and also over a period of time, and even over the period of multiple lifetimes. So that I found incredibly helpful. So you can see in each moment how, based upon ignorance, so based upon a misunderstanding of our suffering and a tendency to grasp at things as permanent or grasp at them as self, then we get involved in discrimination of phenomena. So discriminating this object from that object and me from not me. And then from that, we generate the whole self-identity of, well, I am this body and I am not those things over there. And I want those things and I don't want those things. And then from that, we generate this whole experience of this suffering, delusional, individual experience. So taking it as something that we can directly perceive unfolding in each moment, as well as something which operates over the course of lifetimes. That was something which was really transformative for my understanding. Those are my thoughts. Ayasoma, do you want to add some words?
Thank you, Bhante. Yes, well, all of that the Venerables said, of course, but perhaps what comes to mind that I will share is simply the invitation of seeing how does this relate to you in everyday life. And so the teachings of the Buddha are very precious in the way that they give us an answer to our experience of the world, that it's not a random experience, but there is causality and there is interdependence. So sometimes we can get very analytical with the whole, 12 links and start thinking, oh, wait, which one comes first? So this is this a volitional formation? And what is it dependent again on? And wait, I don't really think it's this, it's connected to this or whatever, we can get very lost into sort of philosophical treating. But rather what our experience is an experience of interdependence. So all these links come into creating the experience that we're having, and fundamentally explain it really beautifully. Because we tend to think that there's always like one cause, one specific cause with one specific result. But in reality, there is a cause and there's different conditions that then create the result. And so with this, with the 12 links, we have a beautiful outline of where to actually take as a lenses to look at our experience and then start figuring it out, both in meditation, so in formal meditation, but also in meditation in everyday life. So what are we experiencing? Like our emotions as we're talking with other practitioners or with family members or with coworkers, or how are we relating to the world, to our possessions? And then we can start seeing the causality and the interdependence of all these different links into it. Hope that is correct English.
Great. Thank you, Aya. And so continuing down the line, we have another question on dependent origination. So hot topic for the evening. Andre asks, when Goenka mentions to observe the changing sensations and observe the painful feeling, is it also helpful to contemplate instead of just observing? Should we ask ourselves if this changing sensation is ourselves? So maybe we can pass this one to Tan Nisabo. Would you like to say a few words on this subject?
Sure, Bhante. I think how do I put this? I think sometimes that, looking at the transitory nature of sensation is enough. Similarly, like Bhante Sudaso is saying with distracting thoughts, sometimes, if you walk past those two people talking about work in the park, you can just walk past them. You don't have to go over and be like, why are you talking about work? Where do you work? What's your name? Why are you, that would be belligerent and maybe happens in New York a little bit, but might not be the most skillful thing to do with every person you pass. So I think a similar ethic can apply here. I know that Ajahn Chah was once asked, with thoughts that come to the mind, should you always investigate them, or do you just kind of see them and let them go? And he used a similar analogy, saying, when you're walking down the street, most of the characters you walk past, if it's your hometown, you recognize. You don't have to stop them and interrogate them as to their past. You just know them and you keep walking. And with so many of the thoughts in our minds and sensations, you've been there before, you've seen it, you've investigated it, you've watched this movie already. And there's not necessarily the reason to go in really deeply in that exact way. But Ajahn Chah also said, every now and again you do meet someone new, and then yes, you can stop and speak to them and learn more about them. Or to carry this analogy further than Ajahn Chah did, I suppose, you could also say, if you see someone that you've met before, but they look different or they're acting in a strange way, then speaking to them longer and finding out what's going on can be really useful. So in terms of sensation, over time, especially if you develop, say, a full-bodied awareness of the breath body or the energy flowing through the body, the somatic sense, then you'll notice patterns of physical sensation associated with emotion. So you'll notice before you get angry, the torso contracts, the diaphragm tightens, your breath shortens. And this can actually really help you. It's sort of like warning bells. And over time, you just know that sensation. And then when it comes up, you can be like, oh, this is here, and let it pass. And sometimes just seeing it is enough. But then again, other times with new sensations or ones that are coming up at a strange time, then yeah, it might be quite useful to look more deeply into the conditions that are bringing them about. I remember in college, I was drinking about 3 cups of coffee in the morning, and I remember just being really annoying to myself at about 11 a.m., and I couldn't figure out why until I realized that I was drinking 3 cups of coffee in the morning, and then I knew why. And I mean, it sounds like a silly, example, but there's a lot of, sometimes we just forget what happened the previous day that could be conditioning our whole experience. What was the argument you had? What happened the previous day? Did you go out drinking? And the more you are able to investigate those causes and effects, the more you understand yourself and the more perspective you have. And that can apply very deeply in the sense of, the sensation of fear you have walking into a room full of people. You can look into that very deeply, and you can know it just as a sensation, but maybe there's a time in meditation when your mind is still enough that you can see the child in you that had to confront an angry family or an angry father and was deeply conditioned by that experience day after month after year. And suddenly you understand a lot more about that sensation when you're walking into a new, a business meeting and the fear comes up out of nowhere and it's primal. So yeah, it would be exhausting to interrogate every feeling, but sometimes new feelings and ones that are manifesting in a new way, or when the mind is very clear, that can be a very good time to investigate experience. So especially traumatic states, if you find yourself in a safe spot in meditation, you can intentionally bring up those memories when you're feeling safe and investigate them from that place of safety. And that can be quite helpful.
Thank you. And Ajahn Kovilo, you wanted to add some more words to this topic?
First, I just really appreciate all these walking analogies. Walking in parks, it sounds great. I love walking meditation. So as this question mentions Goenka in particular, I mean, that's where I started off with meditation, and so I feel some resonance with this question. And yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind, maybe similar to what Bhante Sudaso said earlier with regards to concentration, is that if you have decided that or say you have asked Goenka out to a lunch date, or he has asked you out to a lunch date, imagine he hadn't passed away, and you guys are walking down the street together, then you might want to just give your attention to Goenka for the next hour and a half, or whatever it is. For this hour, I'm just going to be with Goenka, if that's what your intention is, if that's what you've kind of set out for yourself. But I think like Tanisabo is intimating is that, when you kind of leave a Goenka retreat, you've done your morning hour and your evening hour, it's, life still goes on. And I think one of the beautiful things about monasteries is that, you kind of get a chance to experiment with other methods. I mean, it for many people, it can feel quite constricting to stay with one method. Like if Goenka was your only friend and you had to be with him all the time, and he was the only person you could walk through the park with, then that would probably get annoying for both people after fairly short amount of time. But yeah, you've got all sorts of other friends on the path, and I think Tanisabo makes some really good points. Is that just as you stay with the Dhamma over years, you should start trusting yourself to figure out what friend you want to spend the next period of time with, and what's useful, and experimenting, and as you suggest, contemplating not self, if that's useful. But if you do have a specific hour chunk or half hour, and you are still getting benefit from any kind of meditation technique, then try sticking with that for the remainder of the time that you've set for it.
Great, thank you, Ajahn. And there's yet another question on this topic, so maybe we can pass this one to Ayasoma. It says, related to the answers to Gita's question, should we try to intercept between a vedana and Sankhara, or do we observe the Sankhara that arose? Ayasoma, would you like to say some words?
Thank you, Bhante. But I think this was actually in relation to what Ajahn Kavio had said earlier, no? I think because it was related to Gita's question that Ajahn had.
Oh, okay. So maybe
I'll pass it on to...
On to me. Okay. All right. Intercept between vedana. So the question is, should we try to crack in between vedana and tanha, or feeling and craving, or between ignorance and sankhara, or mental formations, or to observe the sankhara or mental formation that arose? Maybe similar to that I just gave, is that there's not one size fits all answer. There's not one friend who's going to meet all of your psychological and friend needs, and so it's good to experiment and figure out what works for you. And I think generally speaking, these transition points, one, extremely subtle. Intercepting it. There is a way of speaking. Last year, I lived at a Pa'ak Sayadaw tradition monastery, and their idea of intercepting these mind states is extremely specific. So basically, you want to be having your samadhi to the state where you want your concentration to be so pointed, so sharp, so refined, that you can literally see every single mind moment that arises. And then, as this word suggests, intercept, the place where feeling turns into craving, and you want to stop that. And I met some impressive practitioners at the Nepal Arc Center, but I think just I don't think we have to think about intercepting on, a moment by moment by mind moment, 1 trillionth or whatever they say the mind moments are, millionth of a second. You don't have to think that specifically, or at least not necessarily, to get benefit from this. Is that, when you notice liking the pleasant vedana turning into wanting and craving and grasping, then put some brakes on that. Similarly with ignorance. I mean, if you just ignorance is a hard thing by definition to watch and to notice. But if you can even get steps towards clarity when your mind is just fuzzing out and dulling out, then that's a good start. So.
Great, thank you very much, Ajahn Kovilo. And Ayasoma, did you want to speak a bit on the topic?
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you, Bhante. So maybe what I can add to everything that Ajahn said, maybe I can share how I've been practicing personally with vedana and Sankhara in particular. Not quite sure what intercept means. Intercettare, maybe it's in Italian.
Right.
So I don't know. It seems very technical. So my approach to meditation is a little bit more creative because I'm a creative type. So it's whatever happens in my current sort of state of existence, I observe it and I try to apply the teachings to it. So at the very beginning of my practice, I used to have extremely strong emotions. How stereotypical since I'm Italian, very cliche. So doing mindfulness of breathing was very subtle for me to, as a practice. But I would have these strong emotions. So instead of pointing my attention to the breath, I was like, how about I just take these strong emotions as the subject of my meditation practice? And instead of, obsessing about it. So for example, if I was experiencing anxiety or if I was experiencing anger or extreme craving, agitation of any sort, instead of resorting to the usual habits of trying to identify what was the cause of the anxiety or wanting for the anxiety to stop or the sensations to be, for the emotions to be different from what they were, I started looking at what do they actually feel like in the body. So the physical sensation and observing it. And then from there, as you start seeing that this emotion is actually something radically different than what we think it is. So we have a mental formation and then we have a physical sensation. And the physical sensation is constantly changing, whether we like it or not. And from there, then it's easier to go from contemplating the impermanence of this physical sensation to seeing the feeling of the sensation itself. So whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So shifting then from contemplating sankharas to vedana. And I've been doing this practice over and over again for over the years. And well, I think Bhante can put a Yelp review that I've become a little bit more calm. I'm still like very emotional, but not as as crazy as I used to be, because I started understanding really the emotional experience rather than being enslaved by the emotional experience. So that's perhaps, so I don't know about the intercepting, but maybe that is a little bit sort of practice that you can experience with. And then Angela says, Bhante Sudaso, I just want to say thank you for the advice to practice mindfulness of the body. It has helped my practice immensely. I hadn't realized how much time I spend with my mind, so from my body, although I'm not sure I've been suffering properly from digging my nail into my hand, now it just reminds me of your teaching and I find it amusing. To work in a question here, should I suffer more to advance down the Dhammapada?
Well, first off, I'm happy to hear that mindfulness of the body has been helping your practice. It was absolutely transformative for my practice. I'm always happy to hear it's helping other people as well. So I'm happy that you're making faster progress nowadays. So I did mention digging your fingernail into your palm as a way of bringing attention into your body. So the point of that is not to suffer, but rather to produce a strong sensation. When you're feeling like you're not able to pay attention to your body, producing a strong sensation just to bring your attention back to your body. So the point is not to suffer. It's not even to feel pain. It's just to constantly train the mind to pay full attention to your physical sensations. So to answer your question, should you suffer more to advance down the Dhamma path? No, you should suffer less. That's what the Dhamma path is all about. It's about suffering less. So by paying attention to your body, you recognize how ignorance of the body creates suffering, but equanimous attention to the body creates peace, freedom from suffering. That's what we're trying to do. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. Yes, very important. If we're not happier with this path, there's something that we're doing wrong. The results should always be a decrease of suffering and an increase of happiness. And maybe we can pass the next one to Tanisabom. Original Mind asks, how to penetrate interdependent origination? Ignorance is the non-comprehension of stress, and the ignorance gives rise to karma, just as fire gives us smoke. This karma is the fabric of consciousness. Dependent origination is the hot topic tonight.
Was there a question? Wait, how to penetrate? Okay, how to penetrate? Okay, interdependent origination.
There's a second.
So by understanding consciousness in the context of ignorance will give rise to comprehension of what karma actually is. By karma create self-consciousness. Oh my God. This is a really big question.
There's further.
Does it end?
It keeps going.
When ignorance, won by way of introjection, fabricates personality, this introjection is the weaving of consciousness and self and mediating by intending. This is the most enjoyable question I've ever read. Keep going.
That's the end of the question. So maybe we can just focus on the first 5 words there. I think that might be enough.
Thank you, Original Mind, for asking that. Thank you,
Yes, no, it's an impressive question, Original Mind. It's you kind of got the whole path there, I think, though. Yeah, so I think I have to focus on the first 5 words, just because I think if I read the whole question over time, I might be able to address it with the care and honor it deserves. But dependent origination is such a subtle and complex topic that even approaching it from this simple angle is something I feel I have to do with care. So we've spoken about the different links in the chain which one can break, and perhaps that is how one could look at penetrating, quote unquote. I think a better verb than penetrating dependent origination might be dissolving the chain of dependent origination. That might be a better verb here. And there's a really wonderful sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 9, Sammaditthi, or right view. And in it, I believe it's Venerable Sariputta, speaks about how when you comprehend the origin of any one of these 12 links, or apply this framework of the Four Noble Truths, at least when this sutta is interpreted in conjunction with a different sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, it leads to this way of looking at it. Then the whole web of dependent origination dissolves. And I'd say that that's the essential element to take apart from everything that's already been spoken of, is that ignorance, which is the foundational link, is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. And it's the ignorance of a skill, in that we are not yet skilled at applying those four duties to our experience. So if we become more and more skilled at turning towards our pain and our suffering and our stress, seeing our craving in that, realizing peace with the letting go of that craving, and then developing the path, then those links dissolve. And that is a process that takes time in terms of learning to develop that skill. I would also say that yeah, I think that's all I can say on it for the moment. I'm sorry I can't give a more satisfactory answer. If one of you has a better approach to it, I'd be most interested as well.
Thank you, Venerable. And we have Victoria Go, who asks, Namo Buddhaya, as Buddhists, so what would be the proper way to react when we face discrimination from other religious communities or ethnic groups? Anyone who wants to volunteer in taking this question?
I think my mic is unmuted. Well, one response is just, I mean, if you started reading the suttas, I mean, the first discourse in the first sutta of the Sutta Nikaya, though the Sutta Brahmajala Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, like basically this is the first story that comes up, is that there are these two people who are, there's the Buddha, and he's, you know, followed by a bunch of monks, and then there are, you know, a couple of people who are following in the wake of the Buddha in this great assembly of monastics. And, you know, one of them is disparaging the Buddha, and the Buddha, this kind of comes to the Buddha, and they ask him, what should you do? And the Buddha says, yeah, if someone is talking bad about your teacher, you should neither delight nor reject their claim, but actually look clearly at what the teacher is teaching. And basically it's just, the Buddha's advice is, see if there's any truth to it. And if there's, then you can learn from it. And if there's not, then there's no need to give it any heed. I think it's like, another quote from Ajahn Chah, it's, if somebody calls you a dog, all you need to do is just turn around and see if you've got a tail. And if you've got no tail, then you're not a dog. And that's the end of the story. So when, you get discrimination from people in other religious groups, that's sad. Because in Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings, we have such clear teachings on thoughtfulness of speech, and using speech as a vehicle for creating connections and for gaining in wisdom and growing in insight. Whereas if other people feel that there's some benefit to be gained from making fun of Buddhists, I mean, it's just sad. And I mean, if they make any good points, then great, but if they're just doing it from some angle which doesn't really home, then there's no need to try to engage. I mean, if it was especially if it's on social media, forget about it. I don't see really any benefit in most social media settings. But if it's a one-on-one and it's somebody you care about, then yeah, maybe it could be a great avenue for mutual growth. So that's my take.
Great, thank you, Ajahn. And the next question is from Rick. He says, I live in an area that does not offer a supportive community. What are your suggestions concerning not having face-to-face contact with a teacher or good spiritual friends? Ayasoma, would you like to answer this one?
Sure, Bante. Well, I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask because my answer would be do what I did. Start a Buddhist organization, start inviting Buddhist monks to your place. Well, first actually start stalking a Buddhist monk, convince them to start an organization with you by religiously going to every single teaching they are giving and raising the hand and asking questions, and then starting the organization, inviting every monastic to the place in the middle of nowhere where you live, and yeah, and then build a spiritual community. So that would be the ideal sort of situation. Warning, side effects comes with ochre robes after a few years that you do that, which is a very good side effect. I'm very glad. Aside, if you're not really ready to start your own supportive community, well, there is actually great opportunities right now online, as we're gathering today online. This is one of the blessings of unexpected blessings, actually, of the pandemic that has put almost every single Buddhist monastery online offering Dhamma teachings. That is impressive and unprecedented. You can literally find every monk you possibly want sharing the teachings live on a regular basis. So if you want more, links on which monastery to follow, you can send us an email and we'll give you a few pointers besides, obviously, the monastics present here today for monk chat. So this is what comes to mind. Maybe, I don't know if the other venerables would like to chip in.
Oh, did you pass it to me, Aya?
Sure.
I didn't know, or Bante Sudaso, it's okay if not, I just didn't hear.
No, if you have anything to say, if not, no worries, we can move on to the next question.
No, I could say a little something. I think the fact that there's a chance now to, first, I sympathize. Even, as a layman, I had a group I could sit with a bit, but there was always a sense of frustration in that most people were not my age, and I felt like very few were as truly as interested in this path as I was, and I felt that hunger viscerally. And only when I sort of stepped into these monastic circles, both of the laity surrounding the monasteries and of the monastics themselves, did I feel like that part of myself was really held. So I think aiming towards the Sangha, and if that implies finding a monk to stalk and then inviting them to start a center, then that's a good path. But also, if it just means really prioritizing, taking time out of your year to go on retreat to a monastery, then that's not nothing. And I think that, people I know who go to weekly sitting groups, that can be very helpful as a support. But I know people who've done that and failed to take substantial periods of their time every year to enter an actual monastery, or to go on longer term retreat for 1 week or 2 weeks. And sometimes the weekly sitting group is less impactful over time than you would think when it's not paired with that long-term tapping into the heart of the sasana, which are great teachers like Ajahn Pasanno, Ajahn Sona, etc. So I think, Ayya Tataloka, Ayya Bodhi, these are all teachers that are located in North America, and there are most likely monasteries near wherever you are, Rick. And I'd say, yeah, if you don't have a sitting group locally, then supplement that as you can by tapping into these online resources, but also, really make it a priority to take a week out of work and go to one of these places, or 2 weeks if you can, and realize that this is the most important part of, and perhaps you already do, but the practice really is the most significant part of life. And, if you have to choose between vacation and a week of practice in a monastery, I would really recommend taking that time. So I think there are spiritual communities available. It just might take a flight to get to one, but if you work things skillfully, that might be enough for now.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And the next question we have here, Ben asks, how should I approach the Pali term atamiyata? So I'd like to say a little bit about this one. So this is a relatively rare word in the Pali Suttas. It only appears in a very small number of places. So it literally means not made of that, or not made by that, not produced by that. And it's one of the more helpful translations I've seen of that term is non-identification, in the sense that we're not identifying as anything in particular, or not identifying in relationship to anything in particular. There's a couple of books on the subject which are worth reading if you want to learn more. So Ajahn Buddhadasa wrote a book on this word many decades ago. I don't remember the title of his book off the top of my head, but I remember he wrote quite a bit on the subject. Ajahn Amaro also wrote a book about 10 or 12 years ago, I think, on the subject of this word, atamiyata. Fairly short book, but also has some interesting reflections. But yeah, briefly, it's not identifying ourselves in terms of a relationship to any particular object or any particular thing, or any particular perception or anything at all. So in that sense, it's most closely related to the practice of anatta, the practice of not self, the perception of not self. At least that's my understanding of this term, based upon how it's used in the suttas. Maybe Ajahn Kovilo, do you have any thoughts on the word atamiyata?
Not really. I mean, for people who do know Thai, I'm not sure if the Thai book that Buddhadasa mentions this in it's a pretty interesting book. It's called The 9 Eyes, the 9 Da, basically the 9 TAs, and it's a pun on TA, Da means eye, and eye like eyeball. So in that book he mentions, and the Pali suffix Da means like ness. It makes whatever you're talking about like a substantive. It makes it an abstract concept. So this is like not made of that ness. And he also, the other das, the other eyeballs are anicca, dukkha, anatta. So basically the ones that you're familiar with, not selfness, impermanence. And so that would just be a recommendation if you have, if there are people who tuning in who can read Thai. I'm not sure if it's been translated into English but Bhante Sudasa, you saw it somewhere.
I remember seeing some writings by Ajahn Buddhadasa on this term, but I'm not sure if it's the same text that you're referring to. Not sure.
Yeah, I think he would pick up like themes, and for a while, yeah, he totally summarized. He said all of the Dhamma could be summarized as atamiyata, and he would like pick up a theme and kind of riff on it for months or even years, it seems. So I think atamiyata was one of his major themes.
Thank you, Venerable. And Chandni is asking, how is the Thai forest method different from the Burmese Goenka method? Would you have some advice for lay practitioners on the path on how to balance the competing requirements and attitude towards growing in both? Actually, I think this is also perfect for Ajahn Kavilo since he's trained in both.
Yeah, and I would love to hear if indeed the other venerables have thoughts on this. I mean, maybe the best metaphor that I heard from this about this relationship, because I was kind of wrestling with like how to reconcile all of the, it's such a clear technique, the Goenka method is, that you just go to this retreat for 10 days and then you get thoroughly trained in this one way of direct your mind for 2 different techniques for the first 3 days, and then another technique for the last 7. And I was talking to a teacher of mine, Ajahn Sanyamo, about this, and I said, so what's the relationship between the Goenka technique and the Thai forest tradition, or Ajahn Chah? And he said that his way of understanding it is that, like, Burmese, or not Burmese in general, that's a larger topic, but the Goenka method in particular is like maybe old style boxing. So yeah, you've got like very clear rules. You can't, no punching below the belt, no like, you can't kick people. Whereas this Ajahn, this teacher was saying that with Thai forest tradition, it's basically no holds barred wrestling, full on MMA, basically whatever it takes to take out the kilesa, the defilements. So this is obviously a metaphor which really appeals to young boys like I was, mid-20s or so, and I was like, yeah, all right, I'm with the MMA style meditators. I can totally just do whatever's necessary to deal with the hindrances, and that approach really, for me, made sense, because I really wanted to, and do want to, give my whole life to the Dhamma. And again, as with the Pa'ak method, they're very impressive Goenka practitioners, especially the ATs, the assistant teachers. But I just found for myself that I needed more than a specific technique, or even a handful of techniques. I mean, the Buddha has 84,000 Dhamma doors. There's the Buddhist version of the Bible, the Pali Canon, is basically, takes up a full bookshelf. So, a whole range of teachings that you can pull from, and it's not one narrow view, and it's very much experiential and practical based. So Ajahn Chah, although he did do studies of the Pali, he did know the suttas, he's basically living out in the forest. These are forest masters, and what the forest and the Thai forest tradition means is that these are, I won't say grizzled, but these are, serious meditators who are out, like, living in very hard conditions and figuring out, like, basically not just how to survive, but how to thrive in a very difficult environment. So putting yourself face to face with dukkha, with suffering, and how do you respond to that in a way which is actually mind brightening rather than mind deadening. With the question, it asked about the Thai forest method versus the Goenka or a Burmese method, and really there is no Thai forest method. Ajahn would famously, whatever his disciples, if they came to him with the method that worked, famously, Ajahn, when he first came to Wat Nong Papong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, said, I've been practicing with this Chinese method of basically asking the question, where is my head? Or who is myself? Something to this effect, a very Zen or Chan style, reflective, almost koan practice. And Ajahn Chah's question was, is it working? And Lumpur Sumedho said, yes, it is. And Ajahn said, yeah, just keep going with it. So there's no specific method. Often Thai forest teachers will teach Budo, which is a mantra practice, which you can, but there's so many different ways to practice with that even. So yeah, it's more a tradition of just finding what works versus yeah, the Goenka method, which really is a technique as I understand it. And if anyone has any broader knowledge about the Goenka technique, how it might be a lifestyle, that would be great to hear, or other perspectives from the Venerables here about this distinction. We could pass to another question.
And Isabel, did you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, no, I was just Angeling the answer.
Yeah, well, just briefly, just echoing Ajahn Kovilo, similarly, I'm more in the MMA camp rather than the boxing camp. So I'm more the no holds barred. In fact, even MMA would be too restrictive. I'm more like absolutely anything whatsoever that gets me even half a step closer to awakening, I'll take it and I'll use it and I'll beat those defilements down with it. So I'm definitely in the MMA camp on this one. Yeah, I mean, I attended one Goenka retreat, which is nowhere near Ajahn Kovilo's record. He beats me out by a very large margin on that. But it was enough to get a sense that it is a useful technique, but it's only one technique, and it's not going to work for every situation, and it's not going to work for every person. But it is a useful technique for certain people under certain conditions. So having learned the Goenka method, I stuck it in my repertoire of MMA techniques and moved on with my practice. So I very rarely get it out of the toolkit, but it's in there. So those are my thoughts. And Venerable Nisabo, did you have some comments?
Yes, I was also Angeling your answer, but I do have one brief reflection as well. I just also think it brings up an interesting distinction. The Goenka lineage seems profoundly, or the Goenka technique and centers seem profoundly helpful, and I think maybe half of the monks we get come from, have done Goenka retreats and dipped into that. One interesting point it brings up around the idea that whereas there is very clearly a Goenka technique, there's not so much a Thai forest technique, is that the way that the Thai forest tradition defines itself and achieves structure and cohesiveness is so bordered and held by the structures, by the tradition, by the ritual, by all these things that seem like they would be restrictive, that actually, and counterintuitively, it leads to great freedom within the practice itself. Because Goenka and other sort of techniques that are more modern and lack some of what Ajahn Pasanno refers to as the props, the images in quite this way, the robes, the tradition, the ritual, it is forced to define itself most by its technique. Whereas when you have, say, something like the Thai forest tradition or the Sangha, or just the path as the Buddha originally laid it out with strong ties and structures with the monastic Sangha, with the rules, with these images, with, for laity, the precepts, the ritual there, then ironically it actually lets there be a great deal of freedom within the tradition, within those bounds. And I think it speaks to a deeper counterintuitive fact, that is, as we achieve more restraint on this path, and stop following our every whim, that somehow something in us becomes far more free. And in a strange way, this whole distinction we're making between the traditions speaks to that a bit. It's that as we define ourselves and our personalities less by how colorful or an individual we are, and more just by these very basic and beautiful structures of I am a Buddhist, I dedicated my life to this path, I hold these precepts, I never lie, I never kill, etc. These are my friends because they practice the path with me, then we can actually release our tight-knuckled grip on the structures of personality, desire, and neuroses, which we are usually compelled to crystallize around, because we have something much deeper and less ego-driven to crystallize around. And I'm not saying that Goenka is analogous to that in that way, but rather that you can see a certain interesting fact that as you move into certain constriction, vast vistas open.
Thank you, Venerables. I'll go to Peng Li's question, not answer. Peng is asking, would one of you care to share the meaning of Upaniyati Jivitamapayu, which clearly I will not answer, but I'll pass it on to Bhante Siddhasa.
Yeah, so I think that's a quote from the Ratapala Sutta, just from the look at it. So Upaniyati Jivatang means this life is led away. And Appam Ayu means, and the lifespan is short. So this is when the king was asking Ratapala, who was a handsome young man from a wealthy family who decided to become a monk. The king was asking Ratapala, why did you become a monk? What did you see about the world that made you leave behind such a pleasant life? And one of the things that Ratapala said was, he said this statement. He said, life is led away. In other words, we're rapidly getting closer to death, and our life is short. So this was one of the things the Ratapala said. He's like, yeah, you can have a pleasant life. It just doesn't last very long. And it's actually not that great. And then you die without having attained true happiness and true wisdom. So that's the meaning of this phrase as I recall the context. I see nodding from Ajahn Kovilo, so I think I got it right. Thumbs up from Ajahn Kovilo, great.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, and Tora is asking, what is the principle of the middle way? How can we know what is the middle way point? Well, maybe I'll take that one, and I'll try to do it brief. I actually like what we chant every morning here at Empty Cloud Monastery from the Gacchanagotta Sutta. So fundamentally, the Buddha encourages us to, instead of seeing things as either existent or non-existent, so having this sort of binary view, to instead see it as dependently arisen. And this is in the theme of tonight's original questions and answers, all on dependent origination. So for more information, see dependent origination.
Great. And next question, we have a question from Adine asking, since romantic love in the end is a block to awakening, and since becoming a monastic is not an option for me, how can one as a layman deal with the loneliness that comes with eschewing romantic love? So I think we'll pass this one to Ajahn Kovilo. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
Interesting choice. Yeah, well, since romantic love in the end is a block to awakening, in the end, so there, there are not arhants who are married or who are engaging in romantic relationships. yeah, the Buddha did teach lay people. He did teach people who did have romantic relationships. He did teach people who, Adine, this isn't yet an answer to your question. This might be to people who are kind of turned off by the idea that Buddha hated love. But basically, the Buddha did counsel, people. He counseled couples, who were in love, who did have romantic love, and gave them principles about how to, remain together and keep cultivating. That's basically cultivate the same faith and the same precepts and the same wisdom and the same renunciation, and then you'll stay together, growing in the path together until at some point one of you is hopefully going to get enlightened. Keep working at it. But yeah, to deal with loneliness, very good question. And it's not something that goes away, when you become a monk. Especially you ordain in a forest monastery. Forest monasteries can be lonely places for people if you don't make an effort to reach out and befriend your fellow forest monks. But if you do, and then similarly, if you're not at a monastery, loneliness can really be alleviated when you make friends and you have effort to learning how to be a good friend and learning how to accept and to know and to recognize people who are good friends, and to really honor that and give space and time and attention and love to those kalyana mittas. And that's an extremely important part of the path. And because it deals exactly with this loneliness. So when you've got friends like us and when we have friends like each other, then that very directly deals with loneliness, and it helps us out on the path. We hear things. I've heard things that I haven't heard before from, and that's growth. And these are my friends. You are all my people on the screen. You're my friends, and I'm very grateful to know you all. I don't know most of the questioners, but hopefully, all of you who are questioners can draw close to monasteries, or just draw close to one another, or the people in your life who you do feel do support your dharma practice. So that's my answer. And it doesn't matter the gender or the sexual orientation. You can be kalyana mitta, find kalyana mittas of every gender and every sex, and you've got lots of options.
Great, thank you, Ajahn. And we've got just a couple minutes left and only one question left in the queue. So we'll go ahead and pass the final question to Tanisabo. So Tanisabo, Roy asks, regarding boxing versus MMA, is it possible that there is simplicity in having a single technique that can be honed and pursued without too much thought? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think that is important. I think the utility of, I imagine most MMA fighters find a technique that works well for them, even though they can bring many tools to bear after they develop them. And the real power of MMA would be that you would have the freedom to experiment through many different fights with many different techniques until you landed on the one that felt appropriate. And I know in my own practice, I think it's very common in the initial stages of the spiritual path to experiment with many different meditation techniques. I spent 1 year just cultivating the sound of silence, which is a subtle hissing in the ears. But it just, over time, made me really stressed out and stuck in my head. Only later, when I discovered embodied breath meditation, as taught by Tanpur Lee and Ajahn Suchito, Ajahn Jeff, to relax the body, that was very helpful. But that led to sleepiness. However, I found that when I brought both to bear into my meditation practice, they balanced each other perfectly. And I think that this is the beauty of developing a toolkit, is that you do find many techniques that work at various times, but you also should find a technique which is especially meaningful to you. I think this is the deep power of breath meditation as taught in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, and why the Buddha singled it out, is the robust approach outlined in the 16 steps is extremely detailed. And if you only have one approach to meditation or one technique, the defilements will usually block it up at certain times in life. But because the body is such a robust and varied landscape, and you can work with that breath energy in so many different ways, the defilements can't block everything at the same time, and you can play and usually find an entry point that works. So yes, I'd say in the broader context, developing many different techniques is very helpful, and then also developing breath meditation is a very robust approach that allows many different entry points in. And just to finish by saying that, this is how we, the Buddha gave countless different objects that one can develop, and to be playful with it, pretty much. And that's what I have to say about that, I suppose.
Thank you, Venerable. And actually, thank you, Venerables. And thank you all for joining us this evening. So that was the last question. But surprise, surprise, actually, if you're here living close to Empty Cloud Monastery, you'll have the opportunity starting in 10 days or so, or next week. Something like that. I don't know what the date is anymore. It would be a surprise for not hint by Kanisabo. Well, Ajahn Pasanno will be at Empty Cloud for almost a month. So you should all rush to New Jersey for this incredible opportunity to meet him in person. He also speaks Thai. So you can speak to him in different languages too. Yeah, very wonderful. We also have Bhante Sumita, and actually for those of you who can't make it to Empty Cloud Monastery, we will be broadcasting all the talks live. So Ajahn Pasanno is scheduled to give a few talks, as well as Bhante Sumita, who's a senior monk ordained in the Sri Lankan tradition. And next week, as usual, we'll be meeting Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. And on Tuesday, our friend Venerable Vimalanyani is also giving teachings on the suttas, so at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. And I believe there's still like some broadcast from Clear Mountain Monastery on Sunday and Monday. And if they aren't, you can actually go directly on their YouTube, which you should do anyway, and like it and follow it, which is Clear Mountain Monastery YouTube channel. And you can find it on the link of the website. So we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu.
Sadhu.
May all beings of